Well, greetings, brethren. We started out in black this morning, but we wanted to be basically on time. It's 10:30 a.m. in Los Angeles, in Pasadena, in California, on the West Coast. It's 11:30 that's the Pacific time zone I was just making reference to. Let me come closer here. It's 11:30 Mountain Time. It is 12:30 Central Time. It's 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Now, times are very much on my mind today because we're planning on doing something starting at 1:30 Central Time, which would be 8:30 p.m. in Jerusalem. And then for the next 12 and a half hours following that, friends, every hour, except for one little half hour where we'll transition from half past the hour to on the hour, we will be playing via live stream a special service for the Second Passover, which begins tonight at sunset. Today is the 13th. Let me see, do we have that on our lower third okay? Can you see that? Yeah, this looks like the lower third says it's the 13th day of the second month on God's sacred calendar. That means at sunset tonight. Somehow our lighting is not right. My shirt's bleeding through. I thought we had corrected that in our keying, but sometimes it is so difficult to get the lighting just right. We've got a window open, daylight's coming through, and that changes our room lighting. Oh yeah, and I see something over there. Even though this is Sabbath, by the way, friends, I'm sorry I'm starting out. I didn't wish anybody a happy Sabbath. Happy Sabbath. Thanks for joining us on this Sabbath, the 13th day of the second month. And, I believe things have happened all morning with the electricity being off for a couple hours and other things that tells me, and some other things I could tell you about too, that tells me Satan is very much against what we are attempting to do today. But let me explain that to you. Let me just throw our slide. Let's see, am I able to get that from here? Let me put this slide up on the screen, the chart we often use for whenever we're giving either news stories or talking about the great image from Daniel 2 or the seals from Revelation or the seven kings of Revelation 17:10, 5 are fallen, one is, even that one is has come and gone now. That was for Mr. Armstrong time between 1936 and 1945. So, in essence, Revelation 17:10 for our day would be, but this shows you, God wrote Revelation 17:10 for Mr. Armstrong's high days, or, heyday, between 1936 and 1945 when he was doing coast-to-coast broadcast, and to encourage him and to show him and us that Mr. Armstrong was the servant God is using and has used. I say is using because his broadcast and telecast and sermons are still available, even though our apostate enemy, let me back for a moment before I want to go check something, but I need to talk to you straight here. Our apostate's enemy in the new administration of what was the pastor generalship of one body. Now that body's been scattered all over the place. And whether it should have, God watched to see what happened. God did not know when he told Abraham and Isaac to go up on the mountain. He told Abraham, and of course Isaac had to yield to Abraham. Isaac could have become suspect and run off. And at one point, Isaac was aware of what his dad was doing, that his dad was following a voice, a command, an instruction given to him by God to sacrifice Isaac up on a mountain. And when Isaac asked, at first his dad told him, God will provide. And of course, that was very prophetic, because if Abraham had told Isaac, you're going to be the sacrifice, that wasn't what God actually had in mind. God had in mind substituting a ram in the bushes if Abraham obeyed. Now, if he didn't obey, he wouldn't need the ram in the bush, because if Abraham refused to sacrifice his son, there would have been no sacrifice of his son. But because Abraham was being tested, and if Abraham showed that he was going to succeed in that, boom, God just decided to stop him, and perhaps decided to stop him even before he got to that point. Once he knew, and once God was able to say, now I know, which tells you, differently than a lot of people in the Protestant world and even in the apostate world, trying to tell you, oh, God knows everything. He's all-knowing. He already knows what you're going to do tomorrow. All baloney. You can change your mind at any moment before tomorrow about what you're going to do tomorrow, even in the moment tomorrow. You can tell somebody you're going to do something tomorrow. You can start heading that direction, and some beautiful temptation come your way, and you decide to change your mind and not do what you said you'd do. You know, and whether it be good or evil, you can change your mind. And God has given us free moral agency. And I simply point that out because there are so many people telling you things that are not true today, friends. And I see some horrible things happening on our picture that I need to see if the lighting, let me change the lighting and see if it's going to help. Now I need to get up and get away from the microphone for just a moment while I change the lighting that's pointed in the wrong direction and see if that'll help straighten it out. There's another one over on the other side of the room. I had to move the lighting so I could get to certain areas of the room. Friends, once the electricity went off this morning, and listen, I hope you don't mind, friends. Let me come back now. Hopefully that'll see if my shirt's bleeding through or not. We chroma key on a screen on the back of us to put this virtual studio in that we use for nightcast, and I use it for the weekend for the Sabbath service thing too. And we've got a new camera. I don't have all the adjustments set on it correct, and so we get some things happening once in a while that shouldn't happen. But, you know, I've done over 500 Nightcast programs, and as we go, I correct and improve things best we can. And one thing I think is a footnote. Let me just diverge for a moment. I'll come back to what I was saying. You know, one thing I think is the footnote for what we're doing here is once I committed to taking over the seat where Mr. Collins was. By the way, you're going to see him today. Let me come back to this. This is one reason I wanted to go to this other slide. All right, I need to... to get on air on time today, friends, I just threw the switch and said, let's go. Even though a lot of things I wanted to do, we were not able to do. And some of the things I would normally do where I would play one of Mr. Armstrong's broadcast or telecast, right now we've been advised to hold off until we either get a lawsuit in the courts or something going because of a Dr. Kenny Ryan's. I'm just ad-libbing to you while I try to set something up in the background here. Has been exercising a copyright infringement claim against those who play Mr. Armstrong's broadcast or telecast, The World Tomorrow, claiming that the rights to that still belong to the corporation that's changed its name to Grace Community International. They still claim the rights to to Worldwide Church of God also, the corporate name. They could care less, of course, about what was the Worldwide Church of God generically. I mean, by that, a spiritual organism. They in fact, they want no part of that spiritual organism. And let me see. Do we have this? Now, let me come out of. Let me switch back to this scene, and let's see if this is working. Okay, it's basically there. Yeah, you can see now. Mr. Armstrong's next to me on the screen. Greetings, Mr. Armstrong. We expect that possibly God will resurrect Mr. Armstrong before Christ's return. He could. to have Mr. Armstrong finish something he started. Now, God, through Mr. Armstrong, built a foundation, and that foundation, that is solidly laid. Any imperfections in the foundation, God corrected before he allowed Mr. Armstrong to die. One of those was a test for us. Like I was mentioning a moment ago, how God gave a test to Abraham and Isaac. The test was to Isaac, too, because there was a moment, even though his dad had said to him, Abraham had said to Isaac, when Isaac asked, well, where's the sacrifice we're doing up on the mountain? When Abraham answered him, well, God will provide. Abraham probably knew. I didn't get that lighting right because I'm still bleeding through the back, but listen, we have some technical problems. I hope you won't allow our technical problems, friends, to get in the way of what God is saying through me today to you. And one of the things I do almost every time I pray, I ask God to, whenever I'm on this live stream, when I open this trap of mine here, when I open my mouth, I ask him to fill it, to speak through me to you. And sometimes like today, brethren, I said, wow, Father, I've got nothing I pre-planned ahead of time to say. I said, but I have asked you when I open my mouth to fill it. So I threw that switch having not an idea in my head what in the world I was going to say. Not a pre-planned opening paragraph, no closing paragraph, nothing. Just throw the switch, get on there, I'll give it to you, Steve, was the answer. As I said, hey, I don't know what I'm going to say. I don't know what I'm going to play. I can't play of anything of Mr. Armstrong today. I don't have time to play a sermon. Now, we do have good argument against, and so far, Dr. Kenny Ryan, on behalf of Joseph Tkach Jr., and I say on behalf of, although he's making claims on behalf of Junior. I did contact Junior by writing, and I haven't heard back from him yet. I asked him, I said, Joe, he was in college when I was. He was a year ahead of me in college. He was in the class of 73. I asked him, I said, Joe, is this Dr. Kenny Ryan's associated with you? You who are, the buck stops here, Grace Community International, a.k.a. Worldwide Church of God. I say a.k.a. because the West Valley congregation in Ventura County, which is just northeast of Los Angeles County, on the way up to Santa Barbara, on the way up to San Francisco, between Los Angeles, between Pasadena, between Glendora, where Joe Jr.'s administration is now located, between Glendora, which is east of Pasadena, which is east of Los Angeles City, downtown proper, which is south and east of Ventura County, where West Valley congregation is, which is south of Santa Barbara, which is south of San Francisco. Just to give you an idea, some of you already know these areas. But West Valley in Ventura County adjacent to Los Angeles County, that congregation, I forget the minister's name out there now, but he continues to conduct services on the Sabbath, even though the minister himself is not necessarily an advocate of the Sabbath. He allows his congregation, which is largely a Sabbath-oriented congregation and holy days, he continues to conduct services for them on the Sabbath. He's still on the payroll that way, and he has no problem. And that local pastor, that local minister, and Joe Jr., Joseph Tkach Jr., right at the top of Grace Community International, top as the president, as the administrator, as the pastor general of what's left of what was the Worldwide Church of God Corporation, and for what assets they have left after they sold off a lot of them. Joe Jr. allows that West Valley congregation to continue to use as a local name the name Worldwide Church of God. And that congregation continues to, individually, the members there continue to make out their tithes to the Worldwide Church of God. They send it to Joe Jr., and he cashes those checks made out in the name of Worldwide Church of God to this very day. So those of you who may think, oh, the Grace Community International Corporation they've changed their name. They're no longer corporately known as Worldwide Church of God, although that's a name they can still claim, and it's a DBA they continue to work under because of the West Valley congregation and maybe some other people here and there still continuing to send in their tithe checks made out to the Worldwide Church of God, sent to Grace Community International, which Joe Jr. cashes. Now, I'm just cluing you in on. Some of you may be wondering, well, what's been happening since we were scattered, and so that continues to happen. However, as you know, Grace Community International was. Let's put it this way. Let's talk about the people. Who are the people? Because, a business name is only. There are people behind it. They've got to, So let's talk about, at this moment in time, Joe Jr. is still in top. If God were to allow him to die, somebody else would be at the top of that and could reverse everything Joe did 180, spun around 180. God could put somebody in there that spins all that back around the other way. And not that I anticipate it to happen that way, but God could. God has all the options in his hand. And one of the things, like with Abraham and Isaac, God put Abraham through a test, and God did not know what Abraham would do until that last moment when God shouted out, "Hold it, Abraham! Now I know." At this moment, when your will is set, and if I hadn't hollered out when I hollered out, your hand was already in progress to cut the neck. Hold it, Abraham. He might have even had an angel bar Abraham's hand. And like Abraham was like, so something's stopping me here. And this voice is saying, hold it, Abraham. And that voice, powerful enough to scare the hair off your skin. It probably shocked Abraham. Hold it, Abraham. Now I know that you will obey my voice, the voice of the eternal. And that was probably the voice of Jesus Christ, and he could speak quite powerfully. And he was one with, now he wasn't known as Jesus Christ then, he was known as the Word, until he emptied himself and was born of Mary. That's when he became Yeshua, Jesus, the Christ. Before that, he was the Word. But the Word hollered out, but he was still, he was one with Christ. He was with the Father. He was with the Father from the beginning, as John 1:1 tells us. But he's the one that's called the Lord, in all caps, Lord, with the word meaning the eternal. As Mr. Armstrong has explained to us, and Mr. Armstrong liked to use the eternal from the Moffat translation that would use eternal, where it said Lord in other versions. But anyway, God only knew at that last moment that Abraham was going to do it, was going to follow his instruction and sacrifice his son in a complete sacrifice. And he stopped him. Hold it, Abraham. Now I know. And God has a test on us, and he doesn't know what we're going to do until he watches us. Since Mr. Armstrong died and Joseph Tkach Sr. was put in as the pastor general, not the apostle, as God had Mr. Armstrong tell Mr. Tkach Sr., I'm not giving you the apostleship. That's not mine to give you. I can give you the pastor generalship. That's just, top position administratively over the church. That's not a showing of the fruit of God's Spirit. That's not apostleship, which only God can designate you as and give to you. And you'll have to earn that. You'll have to show by your fruits that you've earned it. Well, he showed by his fruits he earned an apostleship, all right, but it was not a true apostleship. And let me leave it at that. And the rest of us, friends, God's watching us to see what will we do. Are we on our knees praying and fasting and asking God, hey, what will you have me do today? And where do you want me to be on the Sabbath? And who do you want me to be listening to? And, in my case, what do you want me to be saying, Father? And thinking. Some have told you, like there's a big meeting going on in Kentucky, some of you are aware of, where I read the letter about that. It was real interesting. I thought, okay, so you prayed and you fasted. But what did you say in your fast, in your prayer? Did you ask God, what do you want us to do? And I'm going to wait till I hear from you? Or did you tell God during your prayer and your fast, this is what we're doing, God, and so you back it up. You back us up now, and you like it or you lump it, God? Oh. I'm sure sometimes God, in listening to the prayers of some of us, brethren, I'm sure God has had to say at times, ay, 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 ay. So you're telling me what you're going to do. So I'm going to sit back and say, okay, I'm going to let you do that. I'm not going to help you. I'm just going to let you do that and see how far you can go with that. And, a lot of brethren have backed up some ministers who have told God what they're going to do. Now, God's loving and merciful, and brethren, I don't like to say a whole lot about, even though I have my ideas and understanding about what's happening in some groups, like, some are going against what God instructed us to do as he revealed through Mr. Armstrong. Like he said, don't vote for your leaders. Don't set yourself up and appoint yourself as a leader over a church group. And yet, people do that. And contrary to how we were instructed. And God's watching all that. And when they do that, and when they've done it over 600 times, what has it done? It's created mass confusion and division from those who are watching what's going on from the outside. Some who on the inside are like, oh, well, this is my group, and I'm happy here, and my minister is rah-rah, he's doing great. But people like the fellow from Tennessee who contacted me, it's been a few years ago now, and he said, I've gone through the entire 58-volume lesson correspondence course, and I said, wow, hey, that's terrific. And I said, well, now, have you ever attended any of the congregations of God's church? He says, no. And he says, I'm not about to go join any of these. At that point, there was over 600. Of any of these 600 groups, he says, because that's not of God. He said, God is one church, not 600. And I thought, wow, boy, the confusion that produces, and not like, if there were only a dozen or a half a dozen or two or three, you might say, well, there's two or three major ones or 4 or 5 or 6 major ones, and then whole dozens and dozens and dozens and hundreds of smaller little groups. But by the way, this is not a group that you can join. I don't have a church group, a blankety-blank Church of God group you can join or be considered a member of. And even when Mr. Armstrong was alive and we were operating as both the Worldwide Church of God, a spiritual organism, and the Worldwide Church of God, a corporation with 12 members and none other, the members being the board of directors, which was a kind of a legal requirement for a standard corporation until Mr. Armstrong operated as a corporate soul for a number of months out of Arizona when the state of California was trying to take over the corporation in California. But where was I going with all that, brethren? But I was going to point this out. Mr. Armstrong himself said, as he kind of had a little fun with the audience in Pasadena at headquarters one day on a Sabbath, either Friday night or I believe it was a Sabbath afternoon, he asked everybody in the audience I was ushering that day and was taking the count, and on the way back from the count, Mr. Armstrong was saying, How many of you, well, it still could have been a Friday night Bible study, but Mr. Armstrong said, how many of you, brethren, in this room here tonight, are members of the Worldwide Church of God? I've told this before. Some of you have heard me tell this before. Some of you heard Mr. Armstrong himself say this. And about half the room, or maybe a little more, raised their hands like, yeah, I'm a member of the Worldwide Church of God. Put them up high if you're a member. Well, there's nearly half who didn't put up their hands. I didn't put up my hand. I knew Mr. Armstrong was up to something. I could tell. I could tell by the tone in his voice and that certain playfulness that he does have about him. It was great sincerity, don't get me wrong, but he had a certain playfulness to him too, when you know him. And I could tell something was up. And I thought, well, maybe I should be putting my hand up and saying, yeah, I am a member. If you consider it as the Worldwide Church of God as a spiritual organism, I thought, yeah, I'm a member of that. But I thought, well, let me just wait, see where he's going with this. And then he very quickly, after he got all the hands up that that we're going to put them up, he said, all right, everybody who's put your hands up, put your hands down. He says, none of you with your hands up are members of the Worldwide Church of God. And he looked them over carefully to see if any of them were members of the board of director. And then he explained. He said, the Worldwide Church of God is a non-member corporation, except for 12 board of directors. And he said, if you're not a board of director, you are not a member of the Worldwide Church of God. Well, that meant anybody, anywhere, who ever said, when people ask, well, what church are you a member of? Anybody who's ever said, I'm a member of the Worldwide Church of God, well, no, you're not. No, that's a non-member corporation. Okay, now generically, yeah, you could be saying I'm a member of the Church of God of the Philadelphia era, which is known as the Worldwide Church of God. Because you are, as a member of the body of Christ, you are a member of that spiritual organism, which is AKA, also known as, the body of Christ is also known as the Church of God, God's church. We are, the body of Christ is the Church of God. And Philadelphia era had a corporate name of Worldwide for a while. But technically, you were not a member of the Worldwide Church of God corporation. It's a non-member corporation, only had 12 members who were the board of directors, which could be changed at any time. So there were more than 12 people who at some point had been on the board of directors, who had been members of the Worldwide Church of God. But Mr. Armstrong was making a point, and he said it expressly as he explained this further. He said, brethren, you were not baptized into any denomination or organization of men. You were baptized into the body of Jesus Christ, which made you a member of the Church of God, a spiritual organism. Yes, but you were not baptized into any denomination. And the word denomination, nomination means name, and de means of. So the name of something. So by designating the Philadelphia era of the Church of God, Mr. Armstrong did that with the adjective worldwide, which the adjective has been called the banana peeling of the parts of speech. Or, yeah, is that what the banana peeling is the adjective? No, it's the other way. The adjective is the banana peeling of the parts of speech, is an expression that is said about what an adjective is. And so these 600 groups that have put this blankety-blank name in front of Church of God, or that blankety-blank name in front or after Church of God, designating a group, denominating a group, giving that group a name with an adjective so that it's different. The ABC Church of God is different from the XYZ Church of God. And I'm trying to be careful, brethren, and not name any groups that have already taken this name or that name under the minister that decided he would be the head of this or that group. And I'm just speaking to you from having prayed a lot about this and saying, God, what do you think about what we're doing down here on earth? And so God answers me and gives me these thoughts. I think it's a mess down there. He answered me through that man from Tennessee. Hey, that's the biggest confusing thing that men have ever done, is to set up all these different groups during this time when you're scattered. And should be much on your knees, much in prayer, and much in fasting about, God, what do you want us to be doing? All right, now one thing we're going to do today, and the reason why I have both Mr. Armstrong and Robert Collins over to the left of him, on the right side of your screen, far right side of your screen, Mr. Collins, Robert Collins, will be presenting Mr. Armstrong, or introducing Mr. Armstrong, for the second Passover tonight. And brethren, one thing in the answer to my prayer, God, what do I do today for those who tune in here for the Sabbath service online? What do I do today? I can't play a Mr. Armstrong World Tomorrow broadcast right now till we get further legal opinions and maybe a court case going to resolve this copyright infringement claim that Dr. Kenny Ryan supposedly, Joe Jr. never answered me yet. I asked him point blank, is Dr. Kenny Ryan's representing you, also known as the GCI, what's that, Grace Community International. Does he represent you and GCI? I say you, Joe Jr., and GCI because Jr.'s at the top of a corporation that has a one-leader-styled thing. He can appoint and knock off the board of directors as it pleases him. And, GCI is almost the same as saying AKA Joe Jr. Whatever GCI has as policy is what Joe Jr. says is policy. And so anybody claiming to represent copyright holdings of GCI, Grace Community International, is saying they're representing Joe Jr., Joseph Tkach Jr., because he's the buck stops here, as I mentioned in my letter to him. I said, Joe, with the GCI, it's really you. I said, the buck stops here. It's like who was that? That former President Roosevelt who said the buck stops here, or was it Harry Truman said that? I put it in my letter, whichever one it was. I had just looked it up and checked it online and in the encyclopedias to see. I think it was Harry Truman said the buck stops here, and meaning his decision is the last word on things, and so that's the way it is with Joe Jr., with GCI. The buck stops with Joe. And except God is over. God can flip Joe on his head if God wants to, or he can remove him or put him to sleep for a long time, put him in the grave. If God so decides, Joe could take his last breath in the next 5 minutes from now, if God so decided. And or God could pull some kind of surprise on all of us and do what he did to Saul. He could blind Joe Jr. and literally, physically blind him, and then decide to call him. Wouldn't that be a shock to a few people? Anyway, that's highly that's highly speculative. I mean, that's just something happened with Saul. But just pointing out this, God has the options in his hand, brethren, and God could respond to some of the prayers of some of you and me. If we said, hey, God, how about doing this? God might consider it. Remember when God had told Moses, I'm going to destroy all of ancient Israel and start over again with you building a people? And Moses said to God, well, wait a minute, God, have you thought about what that would do to your reputation, what that would do in the eyes of all of mankind around this area here? That, they'd see you've brought Israel out of Egypt. They'll say you just brought them out to the desert to kill them all. And that wouldn't make you look so hot. Moses pitched for ancient Israel. God offered Moses a very unique opportunity to step into Jacob's shoes or Isaac or Abraham's shoes as the progenitor of the people of God from the point of Moses forward. But God said, ask God to think about how that would look against God and his name. And God thought about it, and Moses made a good point with God, which God considered and said, that's good, Moses. Okay, but you're going to suffer. You are going to suffer the murmurings, the continued murmurings, and you're going to suffer these people. And those people got to Moses during a moment of his anger. Moses let out some lack of humility. Instead of bringing the water from the rock and giving God all the credit, which thankfully that's one thing. We heard humility in Mr. Armstrong. Mr. Armstrong learned the lesson God wanted us to learn through Moses about humility before God. When God is doing something, you don't take the credit for it. Mr. Armstrong learned that well. Especially I noticed this in the 50-year Jubilee celebration of Mr. Armstrong's 50th year in the work. They did Mr. Laravia and my old boss in television, all of them there, did a special presentation for that 50 years, and they brought Art Gilmore in too, and it just happened to be his 50th year in broadcasting. Art Gilmore started in broadcasting at the same time Mr. Armstrong did, interestingly, and also in Oregon. And then Mr. Gilmore came to Hollywood ahead of Mr. Armstrong and began working in Hollywood. And then, now Mr. Armstrong didn't meet up with Mr. Gilmore in Oregon. He met up with him in Hollywood after Mr. Armstrong came to Pasadena and was broadcasting out of Hollywood, and the radio station there assigned Art Gilmore to be the announcer at the beginning of the local Hollywood, Los Angeles area broadcasting of The World Tomorrow. Mr. Armstrong liked Mr. Gilmore's voice, and then when Mr. Armstrong's program was going more and more worldwide, he would have Mr. Gilmore record the openings for all of the nationwide broadcast. And then Mr. Armstrong kept Art Gilmore, on a per usage basis, on a contractual basis, to continue those. And at the 50-year anniversary, the work had Art Gilmore came in. They gave him a nice plaque and award. And Mr. Gilmore was you could see he was quite touched at heart and honored by the fact that the work showed him some great recognition. And then they gave a special plaque. They gave an old 16-inch, 16 RPM type record. The first broadcast of Mr. Armstrong that were recorded on these old 16-inch transcription records, his first broadcast. And so they gave him one like this, and the original microphone like he used to use was part of that plaque. I think that was either the old RCA 77 microphone. There was another type of microphone that he used too that was prominent. But anyway, this was all part of this plaque. I've played that 50-year anniversary. It's in our archive too, if anybody want to go back and see it. I've played it here on cogtv.org before. But during that 50-year celebration, where Mr. Armstrong was given a plaque, Art Gilmore was given a plaque too, Mr. Armstrong, during his speaking, said, "Brethren, all the things, the mighty, wonderful things that God has done through this work and through me have been the doings of God." He said, "Not me. I was simply an instrument." He gave the example of a violin. He was like a violin. The real music is produced by the musician. The violin is just the instrument he uses. And he says, I've been like the violin, like an instrument that God has used. It's God who's been the musician, the orchestrator of all the mighty things that have been done through this work. I've simply yielded to him and been an instrument in his hands. And he says, and he didn't just stop the credit with him, and he said, and you too backed me up. You were part of that instrumentation. He was the chief violin, that God used, and we backed him up, but Mr. Armstrong pointed out and gave the credit, as Moses should have done, and he would have been able to have gone into the promised land, most likely, had he. But God let us learn a lesson through Moses hitting that rock and trying to take the credit for the water coming out of the rock himself instead of giving all of that to God. Mr. Armstrong learned that lesson from Moses, and he gave God all the credit as he was getting awarded for 50 years of doing the work. He says, hey, look, the whole time, he says, and it's been a struggle. What I've been doing has been a struggle at times. He worked hard. He was a good instrument, but he said the things behind the work that made it all work was the doing of God. And, there's a double thing in the giving of credit to God. It also shows that God is with you. God was with Mr. Armstrong and doing, and Mr. Armstrong gave him the credit for that. All right, friends, I asked God to speak through me when I opened up on this today, and so that's what you've got, and I've got to explain. We got to be short. I got to sign off in just a minute or two, because here's what's happening today, and here's what I want to ask you to do, both in your prayers and in actual physical contact with people you know personally. I want to ask you to ask your friends if they observed the Passover this year. And if you find out somebody did not, remind them that, listen, you may have had a real good excuse for missing. Maybe you were sick, maybe you were away, maybe you were held captive by ISIS. I'm only joking. I hope I'm only joking. And or maybe you had touched a dead body. That's one of the things it says in Numbers about missing the first Passover. And I'm not joking about that. Maybe you had a loved one die. Maybe you were holding a family member, a mate, a mom, a dad, in your arms at the time they died. You just touched a dead body when they died. And that prevents you from taking the Passover. And if those things did happen, you should not take the first Passover. And the Passover is so important to God. He wants us all to observe it each year, that if you're in a situation where some, exceptional situation where you had to miss the main Passover, the first Passover, it's the only one of all the feast days, and it is a feast day. It's not a holy day. It's a feast day. It's named in Leviticus 23 as a feast, one of the feasts of the eternal. And it's one you can do. It's not a holy convocation. It's one you can do at home. But it's so important to God that you do it, that it's the only one of all the feasts that he has a backup for, that he has a second doing of that feast. He provides for a second Passover if you had to miss the first. It's so important. And the second Passover is designated to be the 14th day of the second month. The first Passover is the 14th of the first month. On God's sacred calendar, the months are basically only numbered. The Jews have come up with some names, and as long as you don't use the old Babylonish name, it's kind of okay to use that. Like this second month, it's called Ziph. First month is called Abib. It's also called Nisan on some Jewish calendars, but Nisan is the old Babylonian name and kind of a pagan name. So there's a preference among many elders in the church to, if you're going to use a month name, to use for the first month to use Abib instead of Nisan, or just call it the first month. Or for the second month, instead of the Babylonian name that some Jewish calendars use, I forget what it is at the moment, but instead of that, use the Jewish name Ziph, Z-I-F, or call it the second month. But God designated the main Passover for the 14th of the first month. He designated the backup Passover, the second Passover, for the 14th of the second month. Second Passover, second month, 14th. Evening of the 14th. Today is the 13th. Sunset tonight is the 14th of the second month. So tonight, right after sunset, is the second Passover. If you missed the first, or if you had a friend someone dear to you who missed the main Passover, they should be observing the Passover tonight. After sundown, they can do it in their home. Now, we've got instructions. Before I sign off, I'm going to play this 90-second video that tells you how to have your room set up for Passover observance at home. And what we're going to be doing for the next 12 hours, as soon as I sign off, we'll be doing the first one, and a few minutes after that, so that at half past the hour, it'll be 8:30 p.m. in Jerusalem when we first start this in just 15 minutes from now. And then every hour, the service lasts 1 hour. Every hour we'll be playing the live stream until for the next 4 hours. Then we'll break for a half hour. Then we'll start it on the hour. And I did this because of, let me show you something. Because of, did I bring up, I don't have it here. I have I have a chart that has all 24 military hours for the entire, including the international date line, all the 24 time zones that the world has been divided into. They call them Alpha and through Zulu. And Zulu time is the same as Greenwich Mean Time, the mean time standard, right in the middle, and so, and that's where the date changes, right after Zulu time. And, or right at Zulu time, I should say. And so we figured out when would be the best time to start it, and there's a little leeway. And one thing people should do, though, people don't have to do this, is be sure that when Mr. Armstrong comes on and starts speaking with his part of conducting the Passover ceremony from 1981, the last Passover he conducted, that he actually conducted himself before he died. He observed the rest of the Passover. He just wasn't conducting them for headquarters between 82 and 86 before he died. Of course, he died before the Passover in 86, so I should say Passover between 82, 83, 84, 85, he didn't conduct them. It would have been 81 he did, and we have a recording of that. And we'll be playing that every hour. And what was I going to say about that? When he comes on, you should be sure the sun has set. If it hasn't, wait till the next hour. But we tried to set an hour so that playing it in each time zone, starting at 8 o'clock, and then we have a little delay, so it's really a little bit after 8 o'clock before Mr. Armstrong comes on in each time zone. For when you get to the western areas of some of the time zones, especially like in the central time zone, Amarillo, you're going to have to wait and go with mountain time zone because you're so far west that, you just have to wait a good half hour before before a little more than a half hour before you start Passover. You can't start it with the rest of the people in the central time zone because you're so far west that if you start when the people in the east side of the central time zone begin Passover, which is after sunset for them, the sun will not have set for you, and it's not the 14th until the sun sets. God does not do this midnight routine. So it's sunset is the criteria. When the sun has set today, it becomes the 14th. And so be sure the sun is set before you started. Be sure you got your room set up. This little video will tell you how to have your room set up. And just about crashed my room here. I knocked off one of our control board things. I don't think I messed up anything. Okay. I'm going to roll this video, friends, and it's a minute and a half, and then I'm going to have to come right back and say Happy Sabbath, so long, good week, and all that, because I'm going to have to be ready to roll in within less than 10 minutes to start for the people in Jerusalem this broadcast that will be the second Passover service for them. And you shouldn't be doing this Passover observance if you kept the first one, and you shouldn't be doing it before sunset. Doesn't mean you can't watch it, but if you've already done it for this year, that's it. If you haven't done it, you don't want to do it until after sunset. Okay, let me bring this forward. I think I covered the bases on that. Let's bring this forward, and I'm going to roll this little 90-second video on how to have your room set up for Passover.
This service tonight is strictly for brethren, those who are baptized members of the body of Christ, which is the Church of God.
Okay, brother, I'm sorry, I'm rolling the wrong one. Let me see. Where's the promo? I wanted to roll that promo for you. You know, Passover is foot washing ceremony. Okay, I didn't get it up, but I had designed a little potential ad for sharing to help let people know. But I'm going to depend on you to let people know that tonight after sunset is the 14th. And whether they come on the air live with us on cogtv.org or on sabbath.tv, people who didn't keep the first Passover, they should keep this second Passover. And if you've got friends, tell you what, let me see if I can put this up on the screen, and I'm going to try to real quickly, running out of time here. I'm going to recycle this whole thing and see if I can get that promo up to show you how to have the room set up. This is part of this program thing we show. It tells people how to have the room set up before Mr. Armstrong comes on. And it gives a 5-minute delay with a countdown clock just in case somebody forgot something. They still got time. Once we start this thing on the hour, they still got 5 or 10 minutes to run and go get those things out of their kitchen or whatever, wherever, to be sure they got them all. So if somebody really goofed up and forgot, I forgot, I didn't know this was the second Passover and I need to take it. It's tonight. And so, friends, you could do some of your brethren a huge favor if somebody missed it. You know, it's so important to God that it's the only one of the festivals that there's a backup, that there's a second feast day for it, and it's the Passover. It has a second Passover. And let's see, where's that video? Where do I go from here? Oh, I know where I've got it. I got it right here. I got a backup one over here. All right. I should be careful with my euphemisms. I realize that, friends. Pardon me. I'm just trying to see if within the time I have before I have to start rolling that video and have it all set up, if I can show you this promo, how to set up the room real quickly. All right, here. Okay, here and here. Here. And then, I'm going to have myself in trouble time-wise here if I don't get this up for you really, really, really fast. Okay, here. Got it. All right, friends, I'm going to show you this, and then I got to sign off real quick right after that. Here's how to have the room set up for those who need it.
You should have set up the room in which you will observe the Passover before ahead of time. It should be very neat and clean, and you should have a towel and small wash basin and a couple of cups of warm water for each person participating in the foot washing. You should also have a small amount of unleavened bread, glasses of wine, one for each person, with no more than a tablespoon of wine in each small glass, prepared on a tray or table, and these should be covered with an
immaculate white napkin.
During each pause, there will be a countdown clock on your screen, so you'll know exactly when Mr. Armstrong will be back.
Okay, friends, I'm going to come out right there, and I got to sign off, and then within 3 or 4 minutes, I got to be right back on the air for those in Jerusalem who will be doing Second Passover. That's what I'll be doing the rest of the day. I hope this has been edifying to you. You can have a part in this. You can contact your friends and ask them, did you keep the first Passover? And if they say yes, just say, listen, I was just checking because Tonight's the second Passover. If you have any friends yourself who may have missed it, will you let them know? Tonight, after sunset, second Passover. Brethren, thank you for joining me today. God willing, and the creek don't rise, I'll be back here Sunday night for Nightcast through Thursday, and then again next Sabbath. So I'm going to wish you a good rest of the Sabbath, a wonderful week. Thanks for joining me today. Your host brethren for Sabbath Service TV, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreath, saying so long until next time. Tell your friends to join us for second Passover if they missed the first Passover. Bye-bye for now.